I think we're good.
Perfect. All right, everybody, well, welcome. We are incredibly excited to have everyone here today for the AAUP. This is the first time since October of 2019 we've had an in-person event. And this is our first ever co-sponsored event with our Student Congress, which we are super excited about. My name is Amy Pollard. I'm the Executive Director of the AAUP, and I have the pleasure of introducing our two presidents here today. We have Andrew Romano, who is the president of the OU Student Congress, and Karen Miller, who is our fearless AAUP leader.
Thank you all for coming. It's so delightful. We had no idea because it's the pandemic. It's like, will people be too terrified to be in the same room together? So anyway, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy this event and learn important things. So this is why we're here. Andrew and I are going to introduce the five speakers. We're going to do the five speakers all together at first. And then we're going to let them speak after that because we figured that was probably the least interruptive. So I will start. Dan Clark. Dan Clark began his career at OU in 1995 as an adjunct faculty and today holds the title of Professor of History. Dan's area of expertise is U.S. labor history, and he has spent a great deal of time researching and writing about Detroit labor history, including his 2018 book, Disruption in Detroit, Auto Workers and the Elusive Post-War Boom. Dan is a longtime member of the AAUP, and we are grateful for his service to the membership here tonight.
Okay, next we have Stephen Cousins. Stephen has served as the director of the Central Region of the National AFL-CIO since 2019, and before that spent several years working with Service Employees International Union. If the AAUP affiliation with the AFC goes through this summer, our local chapter, that our faculty have, not the students, our local chapter will also become a member of the AFL-CIO. So we appreciate Stephen's insight into the organization and the work he has done on behalf of members.
Quinn Malecki graduated from OU in 2017 with a major in history. That same year, he began to work for USPS and is an active member of the National Association of Letter Carriers. In his time with the NALC, he has had training in and has served as a union steward for his local chapter. Quinn was also the editor of his union branch newsletter during his time as steward. His voice as a former OU student and a union leader is greatly appreciated here today.
Next on the panel we have Lamar Jones, who often goes by the name of Bear. He has been a proud member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 58, for 22 years and took on the role of organizer last year. He became an active member as soon as he joined, throughout the years serving on the steering committees, political action committee, and the Electrical Workers Minority Caucus. Prior to taking his current position as organizer, Bear served as a bowl steward and a job steward. We are excited to hear Bear share a small bit of his experience with organized labor as well as a whole lot of his passion.
And finally, Danielle Aubert. Danielle Aubert is an associate professor of graphic design at Wayne State University and the newly elected AAUP-AFT Local 6075 president. Her academic area of study includes the examination of materials, methods of production, machines, and labor, including her most recent book published in 2019, The Detroit Co-op, The Politics of the Joy of Printing. Danielle takes the helm of her local chapter after the exit of the long-serving previous president and at a time when the financial and structural attacks against higher education are on the increase. We welcome her voice on the shared successes and struggles of the higher ed labor movement. So I will now turn this over to the speakers, and we'll start with Dan Clark.
time with masked faces still. Anyways, my job here today, as I understand it, is to provide some historical context for the topic of workers and labor unions. And as I sat down to try to figure out what to do, it seemed like maybe what I could do was condense my semester-long labor history course into 10 minutes, but speed talking probably wouldn't work too well. I'll speak in kind of mostly general concepts about this, leaving more of the specifics to our speakers here today who are in the trenches right now. One thing I thought I'd do is just start with the fact that when I teach labor history class, students might be there for any number of reasons, but over the years, many years that I've taught the class, it seems like a lot of students come in with a couple questions in mind. One question revolves around whether to be for or against unions. That just seems to be like, am I for them or am I against them? And sometimes students have strong opinions one way or another heading into the class, and sometimes they're just curious. But a lot of students really do approach the topic with that either-or mindset. And the second common question that comes up a lot is whether or not unions have outlived their usefulness. It's not a question that students necessarily have in the front of their minds, but it's often one that they're pondering with some kind of leaning, usually, towards either confidence that all the problems that workers once had have been solved by legislation or something or other, or at least that maybe unions are no longer a useful way to resolve the problems that workers might have. So here are some short answers. Maybe those aren't any of the questions that you got coming in, but that's what I hear in class. But for the first question, whether it be for or against unions, the short answer really is there are so many unions and so many different ways that local unions function that to answer that question for or against can't possibly do justice to the issue. It'd be like lumping together every business in the country, large or small, and asking are you for or against business. But most students think that there's like a union out there and don't differentiate. And the short answer for the second question, have unions outlived their usefulness? Well, that wouldn't be the case until workers feel that their needs are taken into account by their employers. For example, regarding access to jobs, adequate compensation, reasonable conditions under which to work, amount and pace of work, safety concerns, and some kind of recourse if you feel wronged on the job. Or if we somehow come up with some alternative means to unions for workers to get those needs met. But that hasn't happened yet. One reason that people suspect that unions have outlived their usefulness is that unionized workers have become something like an endangered species in the U.S., especially if you look at the private sector. Unionization rates are now well below 10% among private sector workers. But that hardly means that most American workers feel valued, adequately compensated, and with a protected voice on the job. So I'm a historian. I'm going to take a quick historical sweep, to try to, I hope, put some of the discussions that we're about to hear, the comments we're about to hear in useful context. So bear with me as I go back to the 19th century a little bit. We'll get to the 20th pretty soon, and the 21st, before too long. But what we now think of as unions really began to emerge in the course of the 19th century. There were precursors, there were artisans, there were artisanal guilds that involved price fixing, controlling access to the profession, and all this. But the emergence of unions was linked with the Industrial Revolution and the rise of market culture. Specifically, the idea that labor was a commodity that could be bought and sold in a free market. It was a new way of thinking. It was often associated with the Scottish thinker Adam Smith, who held that economic progress depended on the efficient allocation of labor according to market forces. Supply and demand would determine the appropriate price for labor. And that was historically a pretty bizarre concept, and it didn't immediately take hold. As late as around 1830 or so, in the U.S., there wasn't even such a word as boss. Working for someone else, at least if you weren't enslaved, was considered a mark of weakness. Free labor republicanism was a more common way to think about work in the 19th century, through at least mid-century. And that was the idea that everyone should strive to become their own boss. You might work for wages for a short time in your life, just enough to earn enough money to start your own business, or buy a farm or something. But economic independence was seen as necessary to be a good citizen. So, although the selling of labor on an open market seemed rational to big thinkers, it often seemed dangerous and inhumane to many of those who actually had to sell their labor on an open market. And the 19th century is full of examples of workers who were frustrated with and angry about the implications of placing their livelihoods at the mercy of a free market in labor. Especially true when there were downturns in the economy, when there was no work to be had, and families starved. And even when employment was available, although employers might pay wages according to market rates, those rates might not be sufficient to feed, clothe, and house workers and their families. And moreover, although the labor market was supposed to allocate jobs based on competitive bidding over wages, in reality, jobs were often made available on the basis of race, ethnicity, sex, or age. And there could be a lot of favoritism within any of those categories as well. So 19th century critics of this emerging wage labor system often referred to it as wage slavery because of the uncertainties and anxieties it produced. They actually compared wage labor with actual enslavement. After all, that line of thinking went. Enslaved people had guaranteed food, clothing, shelter, and a retirement plan. None of that was certain for wage slaves. Obviously, there was no rush to enjoy the benefits of enslavement. Enslavement was far more heinous than wage slavery. But there were a lot of people who weren't sure that this newfangled approach was an unalloyed success or a positive. Many wage workers questioned how free they were when told they were free in a free labor market to rise to where their abilities could take them. There were a lot of national level labor organizations that emerged in the late 19th century. Common demand for them was 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours for what we will. Some examples were the Knights of Labor. They conceptualized the industrializing world in ways that really revolved around who were producers and who were parasites. Okay? They were pretty expansive in their sense of who producers were, because you could be a business owner and be a producer as long as you were good to your workers. Parasites were people like attorneys and financiers. And I have a son who works for a big law firm. He would not disagree with that analysis, I don't think. But anyways, the Knights of Labor held that moral worth should be more important than monetary wealth. They advocated for equal pay for men and women. And they were widely popular in many communities. In the late 19th century, they were involved in many major strikes, particularly against railroads, but they fizzled by the late 1880s. The American Federation of Labor emerged in that decade. They were a collection of unions representing skilled workers, mostly male, mostly white, who relied on that skill to give them some kind of leverage in negotiations, hoping they were irreplaceable. They had bargaining power because of that skill. They were threatened by technological changes, rethinking ways of organizing work, and were really hoping that their skill would not be undermined by the ongoing process of technological innovation. The industrial workers of the world emerged in the early 20th century. They called for the smashing of capitalism and the abolition of the wage system. My point here is that unions arose as a counterpoint to the harshness of the labor market. There were attempts to reset the relations between employers and employees. And some, like the industrial workers of the world, were clearly informed by Karl Marx's framework of class conflict. Others, like the American Federation of Labor Unions, the various unions who were in the American Federation of Labor, explicitly rejected Marx, but all were responding to the harshness of a free market for labor. The upsurge of industrial unions in the 1930s had a huge impact on Southeast Michigan, with the rise of the United Auto Workers. It also resulted in massive increases in union members in core industries like steel and rubber, electrical appliances, meatpacking. Details differ in each workplace, to be sure, but the most common instigators of these unionization campaigns were really the arbitrary power of foremen, supervisors, first level of management, who could hire and fire at their whim. They forced many workers to swallow their pride and compete to flatter their bosses to keep their jobs. The indignity of that really fueled organization attempts. There was also probably the next 1A reason for organization campaigns then was anger over increased workloads, often called the stretch out or the speed up. The desire to have some control of the pace and content of jobs really fueled these organizing campaigns. And safety factored into those concerns, as well as the ability to be able to function as a human being when you were at work. Money was rarely the main motivation for these campaigns, although I doubt anyone would have turned down more money if they'd gotten it, right? But it was these other issues. Most employers resisted unionization strenuously, even after doing so became a violation of federal law, with the passage of the National Labor Relations Act, known as the Wagner Act in 1935. And strenuous resistance to unionization continues today. The penalties for violating that law have always been weak. Today, fighting back against unionization is done more by attorneys and consultants than by armed thugs, but there's a long history of a continuum of resistance to unionization. As they did in the 1930s, companies still try hard to convince workers that unions and their organizers are outsiders, that they're only out for workers' dues, and that they'll spoil a harmonious family relationship between, to use a contemporary example, like Amazon and its warehouse workers or something like that. Actually, the textile industry, that metaphor was all over in that industry. Private sector unionization was most prevalent in the 1950s, when about a third of the workforce belonged to unions. Industrial unions were rocked especially hard by decentralization, the movement of jobs away from industrial centers and eventually overseas, and by automation, the replacement of workers by technologies, many other factors as well. Public sector unions emerged in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and those unions arose out of a recognition that an increasing number of workers did not work for private sector employers, but still had the same kinds of needs. For example, pay, benefits, workloads, arbitrary hiring and firing, promotions. Public sector unionization involved people like public school teachers, police officers, firefighters, and even university professors here at Open University. The rise of public sector unions has brought more women into the labor movement. The industrial union movement of the 1930s was predominantly male, and that's changed dramatically, as well as service sector organization. Significantly, most public sector unions are prohibited by law from striking, which puts a high premium on the necessity to bargain in good faith to reach settlements. If a public sector employer digs at its heels, it can do so knowing that employees have serious limits on what they can do, as we saw last fall here at Oakland. Unions have been far from perfect mechanisms for achieving justice in the workplace. Despite lofty principles and bureaus and departments dedicated to enforcing those principles, unions have historically had difficulty dealing with discrimination on the basis of race, sex, and LGBTQ issues. And some union leaders, for example the Teamsters historically and more recently the UAW, have engaged in corruption, which quickly feeds the narrative that all unions are corrupt. There have been conflicts between and within unions since the start of unions. Union contracts can be used to protect and defend workers who might not deserve protection and defense. And a lot of unions have really unwieldy bargaining units to make it difficult to represent everybody in them. Our own chapter here of the AUP is a case in point. But all around us today, we can see workers, including student workers here on the OU campus, calling for a more dignified existence and a livable wage. Sometimes in the context of trying to organize unions, and sometimes in other ways. And whether or not you sympathize with them, those voices tell us clearly that the reasons for unionization have not disappeared. That's my 2 cents.
All right, I promise when you see me looking down here, I'm not texting anybody. I'm trying to get better about not leaving pieces of paper everywhere, so I get my notes here. But thank you very much for having me. My name's Stephen Cousins. I'm the Central Region Director for the National AFL-CIO. I want to say thank you to Director Pollard and all of the AUP and Student Congress people for taking time out to do this. This is a very important thing, even if it doesn't seem like it. I also just wanted to say thanks to everybody in this room. It's like impossible to view things without viewing them through the lens of the pandemic. And so just thank you for all the stuff that you've done. I'm looking at people that I know, like I'm looking at President Hecker and Sister Rose, and like I think of the ways that you've touched people's lives over the last 2 years that you'll never know about. It's significant and it matters. And everybody in here is doing that, especially at a time where truth in this country is being challenged. People are using truth, bending truth to fit a narrative, rather than letting truth inform the narrative that they make. And that's very, very dangerous. And it's very dangerous for working people. So who is the AFL-CIO? We're a federation of 57 international unions, representing 12.5 million members. We have 50 state federations and a federation in Puerto Rico. We have 450 labor councils that are all across the country, from Brewer, Maine to Honolulu, Hawaii, from up in Fairbanks, Alaska, I think is the farthest north, down to Coral Springs, Florida. So we're all over the place. And what those bodies do is they try to coordinate the concerted activity of the labor movement at the local, state, and national level. And we were just talking about this earlier, how President Hecker described it as like taking the individual activities of union and helping it become a movement, right? That's what we try to do. We're sometimes successful and we frequently fail. If it was easy, more than 8% of the country would have a union. But I also think it's really important when we think about this to like not just talk about the why we do or the how we do the work and what we do, but the why do we do it, right? And so the crisis, to do that, you need to understand the crisis that working people are facing in this country. And it is a serious crisis. And it's driven by 3 inequalities. There's the inequality of income, the inequality inequality of opportunity and the inequality of power, right? And you can't change the first two until you change the last one, and that's what's so dang hard. We all know what the inequality of income is, right? There's people in this room that could describe it better than me. Some people make more money than others, and that's problematic. The rich are getting richer, working people are not, right? And then there's the inequality of opportunity, right? Some people within the same job class make more money than others, and often it's based on how they were born, rather than the work that they do. But it goes deeper than that, right? Wage inequality isn't the only thing, right? Wealth inequality in this country is out of control. You've got your average black and brown family that has on average between 7 and 8.5 times less wealth than your average white family, right? That impacts your children and your children's children and your children's children's children. That's what I'm talking about when I say inequality of opportunity. And then last is the inequality of power, right? So since 2000, corporate profits have gone through the roof. They've more than doubled. They've increased by 800% since 1960. Our wages as working human beings have been about the same, around the the rate of inflation, sometimes a little lower, sometimes a little above, but in that ballpark, right? And so they've rigged the rules of the game. They've changed the structure of how corporations and human beings interact to make sure that they can keep doing that, because nobody likes that, right? So when I talk about that inequality of power, everything we do at the AFL-CIO needs to be focused on changing that power dynamic and finding a fundamental restructuring of the way that corporations and human beings interact. So the things that we do are about taking the power that we have and using it to build power going forward in places that we don't have power. So the things that we do, what are those, right? We engage in collective action. Specifically over the last few years, we've organized around the Protecting Our Right to Organize Act, around voting rights, and around infrastructure primarily, in a thing that we call the Workers' First Agenda. The earned media, we've done a lot of that stuff to try to build this story about what can solve problems for working people and make real structural change. In addition to that, we support organizing everywhere we can, either through actively supporting campaigns, whatever it is. We support collective bargaining fights, strikes when workers are on strike, like here last year. We engage in fights around state legislation, both proactive and defensive. Unfortunately, more defensive than proactive these days. We engage in electoral politics, and we do that sometimes in ways that are helpful and sometimes in ways that, frankly, are not helpful. We try to get union members elected to office to represent us and make decisions, based on the perspective of being a working person. And then we're engaged in pretty deep community activity, like food relief, right? Vaccine clinics, different things like that to make sure that people know that a labor is a part of every community. And so diving into some of these things a little bit more, thinking about the PRO Act specifically, right? It's a law without getting into the weeds on it that would change fundamentally the way workers interact with their boss when they're trying to form a union in a way that would eliminate coercion, it would eliminate retaliation, it would be the first fundamental labor law change in our country that actually benefits workers probably since the Wagner Act in the 1930s. So how do we do that, right? Because this is like, who wants to sit and learn about labor law? I'm sure the class is great. I don't want to. But talking to somebody at the bar about labor law, it doesn't change anybody's mind on something, right? So what did we do? We went out across the country and we staged rallies over and over again, but we made sure to do it at the exact same time in the exact same place across the country, right? So for example, in the Central Region, one day, we did stuff in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Marquette, Michigan, in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, in Evansville, Indiana, in Minot, North Dakota, right? These are weirdly diverse places. They're all over the board. But that's how you get stuff into the collective consciousness about making that structural change that we need to make, right? And so when we're talking about the PRO Act and democracy at work, it's inextricably linked to democracy in the ballot box. And so that's why we have to tie voting rights to democracy at work and labor. You cannot have strong labor unions without a strong democracy, right? And both right to work and gerrymandering are rooted in the same Jim Crow racist nonsense. They were both formed at the same time. These concepts came together, and they were designed to keep working people apart, black and white, so that they wouldn't have to interact with each other. So tying working people's rights to voting rights is a big priority of the work that we're doing. And then the third plank of this thing is infrastructure, right? Infrastructure comes up every year. What's fundamentally different about it now? So what we've done is, again, we put people in the streets. We've given people specific examples with the administration of how they can take people's lives and make them better by spending in an appropriate way, right? Budgets are a reflection of our values. And this is fine that we're finally getting to that place where they're not just saying, okay, we're going to do this, and by proxy, this is going to make unions better. This is going to make families stronger. They're writing this stuff this time with the fundamental principle of we need to make unions stronger. We need to make working families better by spending our money in an appropriate way, right? And then over the last 3 years, there's been this wave of collective action across the country. My 6-year-old, right, spent her first time walking the picket line right here on campus. And within that month, yeah. That same time, you had John Deere workers on strike. You had Kellogg's workers on strike. And what's funny about this is it's not like there were more workers on strike in 2021 than there were in 2020 or even 2019, right? But the collective response of our country was different. It's because we're changing the way people think about corporate and worker interactions in a positive way for working people. And the beauty of all of this happening is that when you guys are walking that picket line, you're not doing it in a vacuum. I spent a lot of time on the John Deere line in Quad Cities, right, in Davenport and in East Moline. Every time I went there, they knew that I was also walking the picket line in Battle Creek. And so they'd ask me, hey man, how's Kellogg's doing? Because they knew that their fights were inextricably linked together, and you build power by doing collective work at the same time. That's part of what the AFL-CIO tries to do, and is doing a better job of now than we've done in a long time. Organizing. Organizing is happening at a rate that it shouldn't be happening at, given the physical limitations of being able to organize in this space. But people are doing it at a crazy, crazy level, and it's happening with workers in industries that have never organized before, right? Distillery workers in Minnesota, you got coffee workers across the country that are organizing. It's happening in beautiful places, and it's happening in traditional places as well. And so as the AFL-CIO, what we can do in these spaces is support workers while they're organizing by coordinating solidarity action, by reaching out to lawmakers, elected officials to protect them when they're doing it, but also to connect those people that can make decisions about how you form a union to the workers that are trying to do it, so they can say, this is why this is too damn hard, and they can say, this is what you can do to make my life better, right? So that's one of the things that we can do as the AFL-CIO. And then the last thing I want to talk about is something, again, that we've gotten way too far away from as a labor movement, right? When I think about how we engage in elections, too often it's transactional. Too often we're focused on a candidate rather than focused on the thing that the candidate is going to do. And so, one of the ways that we're trying to interact in this space in a deeper and a better way is by getting down deep on issues that matter to people locally and making that the focus of how we engage people about politics, and talking to them about issues first. And then you figure out how the candidates play into that. I think back to the 2020 election, and I think of putting back a few big bricks in the blue wall and all of this stuff. But the work that we did in the run-up to that during the pandemic changed the system that these candidates were operating in. We elected XYZ person, but before we did that, we made XYZ person a better politician, a better elected official for working people. And that's why I'm not proud of electing anybody. I'm proud that we put them in a position where they had to address working people's issues and put an agenda forward that we could all be proud of, right? And that power comes from the work site. And that comes from the ability of a peer-to-peer relationship in the work site, a person that's respected and trusted, to be able to convince their coworkers that, you know what, there's something better there and we can do something about it if we all do it together. Let's take that next step and let's do it. And so that's the thing, that's the real nuts and bolts that sometimes we've gotten too far away from when we come to our political program that we've started to get back to, and we're going to try to keep getting back to. And I think it's just important to talk about that in this context because of the work that you guys have all been engaged in fighting for your own rights, but also in the obligation that people in this room have, because you're knowledge bringers, right? And that's a really, really critical thing that you can't take for granted. So thank you again very much for allowing me a little bit of time to talk to you guys today. But more importantly, thank you deeply for doing all the work that you're doing to try to make your community a better place, and by proxy, our world a better place. Thank you very much.
active in my union at the post office in the NALC, the National Association of Letter Carriers, for about past year and a half. But soon after I hired in the post office in September 2017, I became a steward. And I did that for about 2 years, and also was editor of my union branch's newsletter for about the same amount of time. What that job, I'll just focus on my personal experiences. There's a lot to cover as far as history of the post office and our union. It goes back more than 100 years. So I'll start with my own personal experience in it, and then maybe touch on some of that afterwards. But as an informal A representative, my main job is just to be a carrier and to be there if carriers in my office had an issue with management, with their pay, or with anything. They would come to a steward. First, they would have to ask management for approval to speak with a steward, and then if they were granted approval, they could speak to us. And if there was a violation of the contract, which is what my job was, to investigate whether there was a violation of the contract, then I investigate, build a case file, and speak with the direct supervisor. We have 2 tiers of management in our office, one delivery supervisor that deals directly with carriers, and one postmaster that deals with them. So I met with the direct delivery supervisors, and just talked about the issue that carriers were having. It was important in my job to build the case file, because if I could not come to an agreement with management, it would then be sent up to a step that I never worked at personally, called informal A, where another steward would meet with the postmaster, the higher tier, and try to settle it there. A lot of our issues are about overtime, like inequitability of overtime opportunities, where management may favor certain carriers because they're faster, or they know more about the routes rather than other carriers that they think are slow. So keeping carriers within a certain equitability range is one of the common issues. Attendance, discipline, whenever there's discipline issue to a carrier, it's my job to defend them in any way, to find holes in management's argument, and usually reduce the level of discipline given. As an editor for my branch newsletter, we distributed one newsletter every couple months, and we have 600 members in our branch. And it was a great opportunity to go to the branch office and sit with the president and get to talk with her about broader issues within the whole branch, and also issues in my own office. So I was really grateful for that opportunity, and got to kind of build on what I was doing here at OU with history and writing. One of the things that brought me to the post office was just admiration of the universal service obligation that we have, and the fact that it's in the public sector. After graduating in 2017, I wanted to go into an archives position, like at a museum or university, but needed more schooling, didn't have the time or money for that, so applied to the post office and got a job there within a few months after graduating. And I was a CCA to start off with, which is, we have a 2-tier employment system. There's CCAs and regulars, and CCAs lack a lot of rights. They have to work a lot more hours. They don't have the full benefit of the contract or representation for the full contract. Usually are converted to regular in 2 years, but in the meantime work a lot. So as a steward and editor, I was kind of overwhelmed with the hours I was working, with responsibilities I had at home, and feel like I maybe didn't do enough, but I've been inactive for the past year and a half, trying to gain a footing again, and this is a great opportunity to kind of get a new perspective on that. But I guess I can go over some history of, so like I said, it goes back all the way to the founding of the nation. Congress is granted power in the Constitution to establish post offices, and in the beginning, appointed letter carriers, they were paid 2 cents per letter. It wasn't a wage, had no salary, and it wasn't enough to live on then. It was also pretty restrictive in terms of who could work at the post office. It wasn't just free white people, and the itself was kind of a luxury at the time. Most people would just pick up their letters from the post office instead of having it delivered to their home. So there wasn't a lot of opportunities for delivery letter carriers to make money then, but there was the spoil system also in the early days, in like the early 1800s, that also restricted employment to people who were loyal to certain politicians, generous to them, were rewarded with positions in the post office. And most positions at that time were like postmasters, clerks, not really carriers. In 1810, 1825, there were laws excluding employment to free white persons. That was until the end of the Civil War in 1865. So from like 1802 to 1865, there was that explicit restriction. And around the same time during the Civil War, we just started free city delivery. Before then, like I said, it was peace, right? And when free city delivery started, it was kind of a consequence of the war producing so many letters and communications between people about the war that there was a backlog. And in one region, the assistant postmaster and clerk decided to take all the letters that were backlogged into grocery stores nearby that he worked out an agreement with to be able to sort mail and deliver from there to the doorsteps of people who were waiting on letters from loved ones in the war. And from that time, it's become just something that all cities have, is free delivery to the door. We were, like Professor Clark said, with the Knights of Labor active in the late 1800s, working alongside them at the time of the 8-hour struggle. And I'm sorry, how much time do we have?
Do about 3 minutes.
Okay.
Take your time, take as much
Yeah.
time as you want. Got the mic, man.
I guess I'm just kind of going over what the union has faced in terms of obstacles to the pay that we deserve, that we need to get by on. And it's been going on for a while. And one of the major recent victories was an end to the mandate that was passed in 2006 in George W. Bush's administration that we have to pay 75 years in advance of retiree pension benefits. That has taken about $5 billion from our revenue every year and has created a pretext to reorganize the post office on grounds that we're insolvent, that we can't manage our finances, and that we have to be more businesslike, which has been a philosophy governing the department for decades, but especially since 1970, but really for a long time before that too. So it's going to be interesting coming up to see what kind of policies we enact and the breadth of our service, which could be a lot more than what it is in terms of postal banking. There's a lot of talk about a new fleet of vehicles that could be electric, and whatever infrastructure might come from that could also benefit the public in terms of charging stations and things. But waiting to see what the DeJoy plan for the new vehicles is. I've heard he's working with OUSC, which is not a contractor that does electric production, but the plan was electric production and may still be, I don't know. DeJoy is kind of a reincarnation of the spoil system, in my opinion, in just the sense that the spoil system was a way of giving favor to people who had no experience, who were there more for the money and the loyalty and association with certain political agendas, and restricted employment to those people as opposed to those who were qualified. He's not been in the post office ever before in terms of employment or operations. He's been mainly in the private sector, and that's been another major struggle, is keeping the post office public, not private. And it's the kinds of policy changes that he's ushering in that threaten that. I don't know, maybe people have questions about what happened during the election or whatever, but there's maybe more I could go into if I don't have time, that's fine.
It's up to you. You're good.
Sorry, I had it all planned out. I thought
restricting me
Doing no such thing there.
to the podium, because typically I would be moving around and talking.
Even though we're strict people named Bear, Bear's wrong.
Bears room. Okay, well, check it out. I'm a Labor fanboy. Okay? I'm not ashamed. I'm looking around, looking down this table, and I'm looking, and I probably feel inside like my 13-year-old niece at a BTS concert. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy right now. I mean, I'm seeing titans of the labor movement. Some of the most brilliant minds from academia on labor history. Hell, the guy that I'm replacing, Bob Fetter, is one of the preeminent labor lawyers in the entire country. And y'all are stuck with me. I mean, I'm a big curmudgeonly Sasquatch-looking construction worker speaking at the same podium as these guys, as these vehements of labor. I mean, who the hell am I? Well, the short answer is I'm Bear. I am a union organizer and membership development agent with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 58. Now, some of you don't have any idea what an organizer does. Please, please, please do not let the name fool you. If you walked into my office right now, you would swear that a tornado hit a 3M factory and dumped a shit ton of Post-it notes right on my desk. And this is the God's honest truth. If you go to my office, I actually have a note written in crayon on a big boy kid menu. Okay, because that's where we were when we were having the meeting. I didn't have any paper. Okay, get a crayon and write it down. My job is to actually go out and sell workers on the benefit of joining a union. Now you think this would be the easiest job in the world, right? You'd be like, I'm sure that most of you here know that historically union workers make more money. We have better benefits. We protect the rights and safety of our workers. Should be a no-brainer. It would seem like I could just walk onto any job and walk up to any guy like, hey dude, you want to make more money and have better benefits? He'd be like, hell yeah. And we'd lock arms and we'd skip off into the meadow, Celine Dion music playing in the background. You know, it's not that easy. The fact of the matter is that being an organizer, a construction organizer especially, is probably one of the most frustrating jobs in the entire industry. Has the highest turnover rate of all the jobs in the IBEW. Now, why would this job be so difficult, you say? It seems like every worker in the world would want to be part of an organization where they would have a say in their pay, their conditions, and their benefits. You think so? The reality is there are forces that fight against us every single day. Who, you might wonder? Ladies and gentlemen, it's the capitalist. All right. Now hold on, before you all run out and start calling your folks and calling your friends, like, oh my God, they got some big old commie snowflake up there trying to dominate me. All right. My friends, I am a capitalist, okay? I believe that if a person has the courage to assume the risk and puts in the legwork and has the ingenuity to start a business, they should be allowed to reap the rewards of that business. That just makes sense. But I also believe that no one should be able to reap those rewards at the expense of their workers and of the public. Okay? When I'm speaking about a capitalist, I'm spelling it with a K. And I'm putting some serious stink on their name, okay? The capitalists I'm speaking of will use terms such as job creator to describe why an owner of a business shouldn't pay their fair share of taxes. For instance, you'll hear, oh my gosh, you can't tax Betsy more money, she's a job creator. Meanwhile, Betsy, the job creator, has a fleet of yachts registered in an offshore tax haven that she's written off those yachts of her taxes in the U.S., while I, a construction worker, can't write off my boots and tools that I require to do my everyday job. I mean, that's crazy, right? I mean, that's what I mean by a capitalist. So how does one of these capitalists made? I'm just going to go through this really quickly. And what is the role of a union organizer in all this? allow me to demonstrate. I'm going to use Amy, okay? Amy has a brilliant business mind. Okay, she raises the capital, finds the building, the material she needs, and off she goes. She's off and running. Say 6 months from now, Amy is a booming contractor with 20 employees. She's paying each of them, or she's, for every hour that those employees are working, Amy's getting $10. Okay, she pays that employee $4. She pays $1 to keep her business running. She takes $5 for herself. This is a common, I mean, of course the numbers are funny, but a common model. Now, in the capitalist world, y'all can't see my face, because I am putting a lot of stake every time I say that word, like the capitalist with a K. All right. In the capitalist business world, that makes her a brilliant businesswoman. Her employees might not think so, however. I mean, eventually, they're going to say, you know what, we've been here, Amy, for 6 months. We haven't had a raise. We don't have benefits. You know, we got families. We don't get breaks, lunches. We don't get time off to spend with our families. Or, you know, can we just get some things fixed? Can we get our trucks fixed, our vehicles fixed, days off, blah, blah, blah. At this time, Amy's had a taste of the good life. All right? She's making $100 an hour for every hour that her employees are out working. She doesn't even have to leave the office, doesn't have to lift a finger. She answers a couple phone calls. Her business is making $20 an hour now, which allows her to advertise and drum up more business. And it leaves her money to take advantage of some of the perks of being a job creator. All right? Travel, meals, nice company car. These things are common. She doesn't want to give that up. Tells the crew that, hey, if you guys don't like it here, you're free to leave and go work somewhere else. And they say, look, we like our job. We love what we do here. We just would like to be able to afford health care for our families. You know, we'd like to get at least a little bit of time off so that we can enjoy and raise our kids. She doesn't budge. Amy doesn't budge. As a matter of fact, she fires one of them just to make an example. Now, this sounds crazy, doesn't it? No employer would actually do that to their employees. I'm living this exact scenario now with a contractor that I'm currently organizing. This is commonplace. So this is the part of the story where the hero comes in. I'm the hero. The workers reach out to me as an organizer and say, hey, Bear, would you mind helping organize us and helping us form a union? All right? And they just want a contract with Amy so that they can get some of the things they need. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the long election process about votes and authorization cards and the National Labor Relations Board and late night meetings in dark back rooms of seedy bars. But that's how the process works. What I am going to go into a little bit is that you would be amazed at the amount of money that a business owner will spend not to have their employees form a union. I go in and talk with these workers about the benefits of forming a union. They're all for it. And instead of even talking to me or her workers, just talking, Amy will go out and hire an anti-union firm. Now, for every Bob Fetter that's out there currently fighting for the rights of working families, there are 5 sleazy greaseballs. I'm pretty sure that's their title on their business card. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe it's like stingy scumbuckets or whatever you want to call it. These anti-union consultants are more than happy to go out and sell the company line. And I was giggling earlier because their scripts are all the exact same. Their strategies are the exact same. The union just wants your dues. I have that written, and you said it, and I was kind of pissed that you said it. I'm like, oh, geez, I need to change to a different line. This is one of my favorites. You don't need a union. We're a family here. In reality, it's more like, yeah, we're a family, now get your ass back out there and make your daddy some money, is what the way it typically goes. I could list 50 regurgitated phrases, but I mean, you get the picture. I know one of these consultants who charged $50,000 for a 3-week anti-union campaign. Amy would rather pay that, than give her employees a $1 raise. Okay? I get worked up. So check this out. Sam Walton is an American success story. He started off with one small little store down in Arkansas and turned it into the largest private employer in the world. Walton was so rich that when he died, 5 heirs split his wealth, and they all still were in the top 10 of the richest people in America. The Walton family has more generational wealth than they could ever spend. The living heirs make $800 million a year, don't have to stock one shelf, don't have to help one customer, they never have to leave their house, yet they have spent billions to prevent their employees from getting a fair wage. All right, fear not, my young friends, for there is hope in the future. I mean, right now you really can't open a paper without seeing an article about another group of workers unionizing. Collectivo, Starbucks, Amazon. Fortunately, people are starting to wake up in Power Home Solar. Fortunately, people are starting to wake up to the fact that unfettered corporate greed will lead to the downfall of this nation. Probably the world. Workers in all industries are starting to realize that standing together is a much better position than kneeling singularly in front of your bosses begging for his scraps. And I could go on all this all day long, but I'm going to leave you guys with this. As a construction worker, I can tell you, you cannot build a house from the top down. The capitalists spend billions of dollars a year to stop us from coming together. Not just on the jobs, but in our neighborhoods, in the media, and everywhere else. Once we realize that we are stronger together, we can build a much stronger base to combat these capitalist strategies. You know what? I'm going to stop here before this turns into a Rage Against the Machine concert, and I'll start throwing furniture and shit. So thank you guys.
It's hard to follow. Hello. Okay. It's great to be here in person. I was just thinking one of the other sort of rare in-person occasions I had was here at your picket line. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Danielle Bear. I'm really happy to be here. I believe, as you do, that it's critical that we organize across job categories, especially for higher ed. So I'm just glad to be on this panel with all of you. And like Karen said, I started my term as president of the union at Wayne State of full-time faculty and academic staff on September 1st last fall. And then on September 2nd, I woke up to the news that you all were having a work stoppage. And my first thought was like, this is amazing. And then my second thought was like, I actually have some responsibility here because we're the other AAUP chapter just down the road. So it was sort of a great way to start my term. I worked with our director of organizing, Mark Dilly, and he kind of called everybody in the area who's in our local but who lives around Oakland University, and we got a group together. There was a group of YDSA students from Wayne State who showed up. I know the OU YDSA was really active, and it was sort of this amazing moment of solidarity, so at the time, we were also in contract negotiations for the first time in 8 years. We were in this sort of intense moment of transition. Our immediate past president, Charlie Parrish, had led the union for 30 years. So me coming in was like a lot for me to learn, a lot for everybody to adjust to, but also we had this really long contract that we were negotiating, and then we saw you all were negotiating a lot of the same issues that we were facing. So it kind of emboldened us on our campus, once we saw what was going on here. So that was great. And then we actually ended up ratifying our contract a couple weeks later. So just to give a little background on our local, we represent about 1,700 faculty and academic staff in 13 colleges and schools, including the liberal arts and sciences, medicine, law, nursing, and that includes tenured professors, non-tenure track, full-time teaching faculty, physicians, librarians, student advisors, athletic coaches, counselors, researchers. So it's a very diverse set of job categories that are all together in one union.
And then we also have a very strong coalition of unions on campus with reps from the adjunct faculty, IT staff, the IBEW, Local 58 is on our coalition, the building engineers, student groups, the YDSA, the Student Senate, custodians, the trades. So that's a really important formation. I imagine you have something similar here, but it's an important formation because when you go to those meetings, you realize we are all feeling the pinch of tighter and tighter budgets. We're all understaffed across all job categories. The faculty and academic staff are feeling it, the building engineers are feeling it, the IT staff, the janitors, and we've just had years and years of cuts, years of attrition, people retire or leave, and then those positions go unfilled. Everyone feels like they're doing the job of two people. And then we're under constant pressure to bring in research dollars, but then also to recruit new students to let in like a few more every semester into our classes, like up the cap a little bit and get the enrollment numbers up. So, the thing about being at a public university, obviously, is we don't generate profit. Like, we're not making cars or some kind of product for sale, but I think, like Bear was saying, I'll talk about the capitalists right now. It's, our employers don't profit off our labor in the same way as they might in the private sector, but there's still this massive transfer of wealth that's happening before our eyes, so, sorry, I'm getting nervous, but, as you kind of starve the university, like the state funding's going down, administrators have to look for ways to save money, they find ways to extract more from less, pay people less, make them disposable, cut costs, and then they're paid a lot, and then we have this rotating cast of high-paid administrators at the top, and then we're here year after year picking up the pieces. So as a matter of fact, we have a new administrator who came from here, just to our School of Medicine, and they kind of, I don't think he was very popular here, so now we have him. So then meanwhile, I hope this isn't too much of a downer of a talk. I was gonna try to get to some more positive things, but meanwhile, tuition's going up year after year. We're taking more from young people who then take on debt for their education. Parts of the university are privatized, like our new campus housing is a public-private partnership that requires the university to take on debt. We take on debt also through bonds that go toward new buildings, but then we don't even have the staff to maintain the existing buildings. And then that debt ultimately benefits the banks and the 1% and the capitalists with a K. So there's, and then also there's extreme inequality in higher ed specifically, which I think we're all aware of, but the president of my university of Wayne State makes over $1 million a year, which is one of the highest salaries for a public university president, I think in the country, but definitely in Michigan. But then people talk about the two-tier system in factory work, like at Kellogg's, at UAW, the auto factories. But in higher education, we have almost like a 3 or 4 tier system where you have tenure track faculty, non-tenure track faculty, adjunct faculty, grad student workers. And then we have this situation where you have like the strongest, best job security you can imagine in the form of tenure, a job for life, academic freedom to research what you think you need to research. But right alongside that, you have one of the most precarious, least secure jobs with adjunct faculty who are hired to teach a class, sometimes on a couple days' notice, with no guarantee of another class. So, and at this point, something like 75% of classes in higher ed across the country are taught by untenured faculty, contingent faculty. So, to me, it feels like we're at this urgent moment in public higher education, and specifically in labor organizing within public higher education. Because I think the way we act in the coming years as union members is going to be critical in determining the long-term health of our institutions, but not to be dramatic, but I feel like it's up to us to save higher education in this country. Like, we know we need 4-year public institutions like Wayne State, Oakland University, Eastern Michigan University to remain affordable to students. And we, who are the workers on those campuses, need to come together. So Dan was mentioning a little bit, the challenges of having different people who are doing different jobs in the same union, but that's what we're gonna have to come together between the trades, the faculty and the students, everyone, to figure out how we can kind of move the universities to be the way that we need them to be. So, I think we all, hopefully, we all believe in the project or understand the project of higher education. A solid university education can really help somebody in terms of their quality of life, their social mobility, having a critical understanding of the world. And I think we should take a page out of the book of the Chicago Teachers Union, who talk about bargaining for the common good, that it's not just about bargaining bread and butter issues like wages and hours, working conditions, but really we need to work in coalition with community, in coalition with other unions, to figure out shared bargaining priorities. So I say all this is impossible, this is hard work to do, but I think, one kind of thing we can aspire to is to work together to figure out what are the bargaining priorities that we can push for on all our campuses at the same time. So I'm looking forward to being in AFT AAUP with you all. We're already in AAUP David Hecker's years, so we're gonna work closely with Michigan State organizing. I think that's gonna really benefit us. I've also been energized by the work of HELU, the Higher Ed Labor United group, which is a coalition of university campus workers across all the unions like SEIU, AFT, UAW, NEA. And I think these kinds of coalition work is really what's gonna save us. So I'll end with that, and hopefully we can have some discussion.
Thank you all for such a wonderful, inspiring speeches. So I'm Allison Bone. I'm a special lecturer in writing and rhetoric, and I am the vice president of the Oakland chapter of the AAUP. So I am here to take questions. Well, I'm not answering questions, but does anybody have any questions?
I got the first question. Dibs.
Yes.
I do want to know what the heck happened at the post office with the joy and the election. No pressure. All eyes on you.
And the local.
Well, you have to turn it on. I think there's a switch.
Oh, I'm just loud. I didn't even know it was off.
Very good.
There you go.
At the local level, the main policy change we had in my office was typically when I come to work, we clock in, we have a bunch of unsorted mail. And we also have our own cases for each route that has cells for the addresses of every delivery point on our route that we can take the unsorted mail and put into in order to organize it in delivery order, take it out to the field and deliver it. But during the election, we were told when we came in, we only had 20, 30 minutes to organize all our mail. At which point, if we weren't finished, we'd have to go out anyway and leave what we didn't sort behind. And when we came back to the office, they claimed that it was about getting us back before it got dark. Because the volume was so large, they wanted us to go out and deliver and finish our routes and then come back because they didn't think we could finish the whole thing with enough, time in the day. But the net effect was coming back to the office with mail that was delayed, including first class, priority, packages. And yeah, horrible time for that to be implemented. It wasn't a brand new policy, but I think the timing was, product of corruption. That's all.
Oh no, I'm just curious.
Yes.
Another question about the post office. As a begrudging stamp collector and former election inspector, how do you feel about the nomination, about the talks of Detroit Representative Brenda Lawrence potentially being nominated to the Board of Governors?
I hadn't heard about that specifically.
It's been coming through the woodwork through some of the news.
I'm not really sure. I don't follow her as Board of Governors is a really important issue though. Since 1970, the strike of 1970 was the last strike that happened at the post office, and after that strike, we were reorganized as an independent agency of the government. Before that, we were in the government as a department, had no collective bargaining. We could be represented after 1962. Kennedy issued an executive order that gave us recognition because up to that point there was no representation, no recognition of the union. So we had a presence for like 10 years up to 1970, the strike, but no power. And the strike established the post office as an independent agency that gave us work, room, floor, relationships with management in terms of grievance settlement procedures and other things. And after that, the Board of Governors was a part of the management at the top levels. Was empty completely, I think, for a few years recently, over the past 10 years. Was recently filled a lot by Trump. They appoint the Postmaster General. So the composition, the political composition of the Board of Governors can determine a lot about policy because it can appoint the Postmaster General, we can change a lot. So that's a big part. And I hope whatever composition it takes soon will be in a better direction for, preserving it as a public agency and not cutting.
Can I take a crack at that one too? There's something around here. I'm just gonna do this. So, outside voice, right? So there's like a specific way this is playing out. You mentioned the Oshkosh defense and the vehicles, the postal vehicles, right? So there's a $6 billion contract granted by the United States government to build the next generation postal vehicle. It gets bid out to this company called Oshkosh Defense, which is represented by the United Auto Workers in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. They have a plant that already exists that can be retooled to build this work, right? So 2 months after they get this bid, which was given, we assume with the idea that it would be built, at this plant that's already union.
I'm about to throw shit.
Oh, it gets worse. It gets worse.
Oh, no, I know. I'm telling you, just watch. Duck down, I'm gonna be throwing a chair.
2 months later, they decide that they're not going to build this in Wisconsin. They're going to build this at a brownfield facility in South Carolina, which would likely be non-union and likely be significantly lower wages. Then they go to the workers at the Oshkosh plant and say, guess what? We need you to tool this line that they're going to use to build this plant to build this vehicle in South Carolina, right? So we do what we do. We start calling the people, call Senator Tammy Baldwin, we call, Gary Peters, we call all these folks. And they're angry, they want to do something, but the answer we get is always the postal, they do their own thing, right? And so we have a dotted line of accountability to these group of people, right? And so that is a concrete decision that the postal board can make that would make life better for working people in Wisconsin and raise standards across the board. And the reason they're not doing it is because they're working on a majority here, but there are a majority of pro-worker folks on the board. So I don't know, whoever it is, it's like whoever, the postal workers know that better than anybody else who shouldn't be on that board. But those are ways that the postal board that matters beyond just that into a much broader space and impacts all of us. Even here in Michigan, guess where those parts come from, right? We build them here. We build the parts that are going to go in those vehicles here. And if we don't fix this kind of stuff, this is how your government spends your money in ways that harm working people. And even in a situation where our government wants to spend it this time in the right way, they're not able to do so because of this residual stuff. So this kind of thing matters dramatically.
I didn't throw anything.
You did?
I did not throw anything.
Thank you. All right, next.
Okay, hi, I'm Kayla. I'm chair of the Young Democratic Socialist chapter at OU. Thanks for the shout out, Danielle. And I'm also a student worker on campus. So for those that may not recall, last year a handful of student workers organized for things like better wages, to not have their jobs eliminated, fair hours, things like that. The university fired them all immediately. So I guess my question for the panel would be, how can student workers that aren't represented by a union kind of fight for those things without getting fired?
I actually have a question for you. Were there unfair labor practice filed with the NLRB and once those workers were fired?
I think there's other people in the room that might.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hi, Shirley.
Yeah, I was fired. It wasn't great. Not with the LLRB, no, but there is things happening.
Things happening.
Legal things.
Can we be more specific about the things?
Yeah, I'm suing the university.
Are you organizing under an organization?
We weren't. probably a little naive because I thought unionizing would be much easier and it was not.
What did I tell you?
Just go skipping off into the middle.
I mean, I was so inspired by Amazon. I was like, oh, this should be easy. We could probably do this in a few months.
So you were fired by, listen, I'm not gonna take up, cause
I think you have most of the fired student workers here, so they're happy to talk about it.
Got cards in your pocket?
As a matter of fact, I keep cards. So if you were fired by the university, that's against the National Labor Relations Act of 1935 that everybody's talking about, and you can actually file an unfair labor practice case with the NLRB. Now, the NLRB, while it's a big, scary entity, it's a government body, it's relatively toothless. But they can make the university, I'm gonna say this, elections matter, okay? Because 2 years ago, had you taken your case to the NLRB, it probably would have gotten just tossed out. President Biden appointed a very pro-labor, labor-friendly head of the NLRB, and now she's tearing people's asses up. Oh yeah, I mean, she's going after, and she felt like, bring me cases to make examples of these people who have been taking advantage of workers all this time. And I mean, I have a case or one campaign right now where I have 30 ULPs filed, and they are just killing this contract. So you might want to actually talk to a board agent about getting, in addition to suing the university. And if you want, I can talk to you about organizing under an organization, get an umbrella, find a parent company to sort of spearhead it that has, the capital and the resources and the knowledge. Even if it's not with the IBEW, I'm sure the AFL-CIO could find someone if you found a better fit. But yeah, you don't have to go it alone. Okay, but I'll talk to you after.
Jeremy, he's got a lot more information than I ever had for you, so listen to him.
Any more questions?
Okay, so I don't know who this would be for. I understand the idea of public sector workers not being able to strike. You want the cops going on strike, you want the fire department going on strike, because then your house burns down with your debt. Where did that come from? Other than non-essential, we're essential. I guess during COVID, we were essential workers. But if you can't strike, what's the power of that? What can we do? We're getting sued. AAUP is getting sued by the university because we went a work stoppage last September, right?
Call it a strike. It's fine.
They can't call it a strike. So
No, call it a strike. It was a strike.
Well,
You might as well
but it's
call it a
not,
strike
right?
now.
It's a work stoppage. So what are we supposed to do if we can't actually legally strike?
Thank Reagan. That's where it started. You will be the labor history guy.
I don't know if this works.
Let me figure it out for you while you're talking. Hold on.
Here you go. Pass that on down.
There we go, got it.
Well, now I'm forced to say something. I was hiding. There are many different rationales. I'm not going to call them rational rationales, but for not allowing public workers to strike. One famous one was Strom Thurmond, actually. Famous racist and anti-union activist. They were often hand in hand. His argument was that a strike against a government entity was the same as an uprising against the government, that it was actually traitorous. And so they linked, remember, he wasn't in favor of private sector strikes or private sector unions either, but that was the argument. And then it built to more recently the argument that, for instance, public school teachers contribute to local officials, and then those local officials might bargain more generously with the teachers' union and result in better contracts, which would raise taxes on the public. So essentially the argument against was that public sector unions, if they had too much strength, would be unfair to the tax-paying public. the general argument that was used. But that's why I emphasize that for that system to work, there has to be good faith bargaining, and you cannot assure that. And so it's a bind. But on the other hand, the private sector strikes historically haven't always ended well either. So it's a dangerous course to take. So I don't know what more I can say there, but those are the rationales that were made public.
I thought that they were still allowed up until they broke that, they broke the.
No. The PACCO workers, air traffic controllers, were violating federal law when they went on strike. It wasn't Reagan who determined that would be the new policy. They were already not allowed to strike, but they were working under pretty stressful conditions, high mandatory overtime, a lot more at stake if things go wrong as an air traffic controller than if I screw up in the classroom. A lot of those air traffic controllers came out of the military too, and they had a hard time accepting the fact that they were anti-American in standing up for their rights on the job.
Ken?
I'm Ken Minton. I'm a professor here in the Irish Research Institute, and I've been involved with the AAUP probably since I got here, I guess, around 2001. I'm a Canadian, and what I want to ask about is graduate students, because basically, I was a graduate student in Western Ontario, which is a couple hours away from here in London, and while I was a grad student there, and this would be probably around 89 at some point, as of course we taught lab courses and we're employees of the university too, we suddenly got the right to basically bargain. And we actually were on strike for a couple of weeks, not teaching labs, and the university had to pony up and do a few things. One thing they gave us was the potential to put $50 in a month and get it matched and start a little retirement fund. And I only put maybe about a few $1,000s into that over my whole career as a PhD student, but I still have that fund that grew. It'll buy me a car one day when I retire. But this idea of graduate students having unions has also taken a hold at some places in the United States, which I'm glad to see. Are any of you involved in anywhere across the country or in Michigan of graduate students also basically being organized more with a bargaining body to bargain with their universities?
Yeah, we have a GEOC at Wayne.
Can I just step up here for a minute?
Go for it, David.
Just only because it's directly to this question. So I'm David Hacker. I'm president of the American Federation of Teachers here in Michigan, and it's going to be fantastic to have this OUAAUP chapter also affiliated with us a few months down the road. It's going to be great. We really appreciate it. So grad assistants in this state, we have them organized at Wayne State, University of Michigan, Western Michigan, and Michigan State University. In fact, that's a few years ago, as you can see from the color of my hair, that's the part of the labor movement I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison a long time ago. So the UAW, also not in Michigan, but in California, has organized a lot of grad assistants. CWA actually has them in the State University of New York system, and they're organized in a whole bunch of other places as well. A challenge is, we experienced this at CMU when the grad assistants organized, but are no longer organized. It's very hard to keep it going unless there's a substantial PhD programs at the university. Only because of the amount of time people are here, right? The grad assistants at CMU organized, and CMU has very few PhD programs. They organized, and people did a fantastic job, but that local no longer exists because people just, left the year after it was organized. So if the university has a good chunk of it, not all, but a good chunk of it PhD programs, again, here in Michigan, and the local University of Michigan's been here forever, since the mid-70s. The other three have been organized since 1998. Thanks.
I think also, I was also involved in grad student organizing when I was a grad student. But there are different models. I mean, one thing that I've learned since coming into this position is that like every local, there's so many different forms of locals, but like at the Rutgers, AAUP, AFT, they have grad students in their local. So it's, which you know, presents challenges too, because you've got people who are overseeing PhDs and then they're also in the union together. But one thing is the grad students tend to be more radical. So they're kind of the radical wing of the union there, and I think we see similar things at Wayne State too in our coalition. They're the ones who are really pushing for issues around sexual violence on campus and like funding for the Title IX office. They're sort of bringing things to the fore that people in my local are maybe not thinking about or not forefronting. So, but I think that model, you know, I don't know how complicated it is to organize this, but that model of being together in the same local would help prevent some of the turnover issues.
Great. Thank you all so much for answering questions, and thank you all for asking questions. We are going to have Karen and Andrew come back up and say a few words.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. So happy. Hopefully you found this informative and enjoyable, and if not, we will try to do this next year and be better. And we are delighted that you all came and that you stayed and asked some wonderful questions. I am so thankful to our panelists. I could not imagine a better group of people to look at this very broad range of union activity today. And I thank you very much for taking time out of your schedules to come on up to Oakland and give us a hand. Thank you, David, for coming. I would like to say we have all kinds of cool swag. Help yourselves. We have trays of cookies and pop and all kinds of stuff like that. We don't want any of that to be here at the end. Okay? This is your duty. There is a student raffle. We are going to actually send you an email if you won. Is that what we're going to do? We're going to do it right now. Let's do it right now.
I didn't really think about it. I'm not good at DIY.
Must be present to children.
Got to do a drum roll.
Okay, ready? You're in for it. Yeah, sure. Good one.
Cynthia,
Cynthia here?
Actually, you are not required to be here to win. This is why we got your emails, but if you are here, then we can just.
that is